When visiting a friend of mine who made a business of taking pictures of children, especially photography of children under 6 years of age, I was impressed by how she managed the babies. And one day I said, "How do you get your pictures without having the babies cry? It seems to me that you just have an art of handling these children." And she said, "Come and I will show you." So I went to her home where she had her studio. And I was in the living room when a mother came in with a baby. And my friend let her in and gave her a chair and went about something else while the mother and the baby sat there until the baby had looked around and accustomed itself to its surroundings. And then my friend turned from halfway across the room and began to look at the child, just smiling and looking at the baby. And the baby looked at her. And presently the baby held out its arms, and then she went to it and took the baby from the mother and said, "You sit down here and wait." And she took the baby into her studio. And there she got all the poses that she wanted, 10 different expressions that she strives to get with every baby. And she got them all with a happy child responding. And then she brought the baby up and gave it to its mother, and the two left, and I said, "Well, now tell me how you did it. I saw what you did, but still I don't know what you did or how you did it." And she said, "I call it the power of love going out." And she said, "Do you know that love is as real? Outgoing love is as real as any vibration. And when I stand and love the baby quietly, the baby feels it, because children are very sensitive." She went on to say that children could be distressed by a person who's nervous and irritable. They would respond to that. And children would respond to a person who is calm and poised and quiet and loving. And she said, "I just love the children. And I make it a point to be still and let love go out to the child until the child feels it and responds to me. I never force myself upon a child. I never coerce the child. I just let love go out." And then she went on to say, "But there's one thing about it, you can't fake it. You can't put on an act and act like you love the baby. You have to really love it, because the love that goes out with power must be a deep sincerity. And when you honestly and actually love the child feels that outgoing love and is drawn by it." That's such a lovely thing, such a wonderful thing. I was in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, just a short time ago, and Leo Baldwin's sister, I think Leo's here, I've heard that he is, I hope I get to see him. Anyway, Leo Baldwin's sister came to me and said, "I would like for you to pray for a little child who has very serious trouble." And I told her I would. And while others were eating lunch in the basement, I went with this lovely woman up into the sanctuary. And there was the woman with this baby, wiggling, fretting, nervous, just a few months old, probably 6 months old. And I sat down by the mother, and I just let love go out to that baby. And presently it turned and looked at me as steadily. It looked at me with the intelligence of a mature person on its face. There was something in that baby that was beyond infanthood, and it was still and it was calm. And it sat there and looked at me as I talked to it and as I put my hands on it. And it seemed to be transformed into a different sort of an individual. as together we were lifted into the presence of our Creator. I don't know what happened to the baby. I came on home, and after I bless people, I leave them with God. That's the best way to do, because if we keep interfering, we interfere with God's work. But we can bless, especially children, and let love pour out until love does its work and something happens. That's the greatest power in the world. Love. Henry Drummond said so. St. Paul said so in his wonderful chapter on love in Corinthians. Jesus said so. Because of all the commandments given by Moses, Jesus summed them up in two great commandments, and the gist of both of them was love. Love God and love your fellow men. And if you want to get at the root of all good, find love. And if you want to find God, find love. When we can let love flow out from ourselves, that divine flow of infinite grace we call love, then we are becoming one with God and putting into use the greatest power in the universe. I've seen love work many times. I've seen it work with animals. Have you seen love work with animals? You don't have to tell a child that you love it or that you don't like it, and you don't have to tell a dog that you dislike it. It knows it instinctively. And you can let on like you like it, but really, if you don't, and if you're scared of it, the dog knows it very deeply and sincerely and will act accordingly. And so it is with this love going out. Animals understand it. We were driving out through Colorado at one time, and we stopped at a filling station. There was another car stopped there. Back of this station there was a beautiful canyon and a beautiful view. A car drove up, and the people got out, and among these people was a child about 3 years old. And while the father and mother were caught up in the beauty of looking at the great canyon, the little girl saw a doggie back of the station. Now, she wasn't old enough to read, so she couldn't read the sign that said, "Beware of vicious dog." She couldn't read it at all. She saw a doggie. And she ran up to that nice doggie, and she lifted up her little arms, and she smiled, and the dog held its head down, and she put her arms around its neck, and she loved it, and she talked to it, and the dog just stood there and wagged his tail, just as calm. And after a while, the father came back from looking at the view and saw his daughter and read the sign, and he called out to her to come. And the dog bared its teeth and growled fiercely. And then he had enough sense to turn his back and to speak to her very softly and tell her, "Come on now, dear, we're ready to go." And she patted the doggie and told it goodbye and turned and walked away. What was it? It was the power of the love in the child going out to the dog. The child had no animosity, it had no hate, it had no vengeance. It would not hurt the dog as the dog had been hurt by adult people. And the dog responded to pure love. Perhaps you have read, as I have, the story of Helen Keller. You know, Helen Keller has been blind and deaf and dumb, although she has learned to speak mechanically, since she was an infant due to a disease. And Helen Keller sees with her fingertips, and when she wants to see anything, she has to put her hands on it and feel with her fingers. Well, Helen Keller had seen many things, and she loves animals, and she wanted to see a lion. But to see a lion with her fingertips seemed to be an impossible thing. She went to a zoo and asked the keeper if she might see a lion, and they refused. She went to another, and they refused. But she was not to be daunted, and she kept on asking if she might see a lion. Go in the cage and see a lion with her fingertips. And finally, this desire was granted. And it was arranged that she would go in a den and feel a lion with her fingers. However, two of the keepers stood just outside with revolvers ready to shoot the animal if it should attack Miss Keller. But Helen Keller went into the cage filled with love, absolutely devoid of any fear, and she walked up to that great beast and she reached out her hands and she put them on it, and the lion sensed love. And it stood as still while she felt of its body and up the back and its great mane, and she felt of its head and its ears and felt of its forelegs and its body and its hind legs and its tail. And then she felt back up the body again, all along the animal's body, until she came to the head and she patted it and loved it and walked out. And the keepers slumped. Their heart was in their mouth, but they needn't have been, because there was pure love, unadulterated, unafraid. And the lion understood it, and Miss Keller understood it, and there was perfect rapport between the two. Isn't it wonderful what love can do? The power of love going out. We've put our tongues in our cheek as we have read the story of Daniel, who went into a lion's den, or was thrown into a lion's den because he dared to worship Jehovah God when he was in a foreign land. And those who plotted against Daniel, you know, had gotten the king to sign a decree that anyone who would worship any person except the king himself should be cast in the den of lions. And Daniel went very poised and knelt before his window looking toward Jerusalem and prayed to Jehovah as he did every day, unperturbed. The result was that he had to be cast in the lion's den. And the king was greatly disturbed about this. He was very sorry he had signed such a decree, but flattery got him into it, and that's a dangerous thing, you know. We need to be wary of it because it can get us in bad in many ways. But Daniel was cast in the lion's den, the story tells us, and all night long the king was troubled, and he walked back and forth. And he regretted that he had allowed Daniel to be put in the lion's den. And very early the next morning he went to the den of the lions and he cried, "Daniel, Daniel, is thy God whom thou servest continually able to deliver thee?" And Daniel answered, there he was, among the lions. Well, if Helen Keller could do it in the 20th century, is it impossible that Daniel might have done it way back there? This great power of love is the same in all ages. And when it's used at one time, it is as powerful as at another. So perhaps the story is not such a fairy tale as we have thought it to be. The tremendous power of love going out. I've seen this power work. A very lovely friend of mine married into a family as a stepmother. She had a great and a loving spirit, and her intentions were good. But there were teenage children in that family, and that's always a difficult circumstance. And there was a teenage boy, and he vowed that he would never let any woman come into that home and take the place of his mother. So he did everything he could to make this woman's life miserable. He talked to her unkindly. He banged his way through the house. And especially when his father wasn't there, he was very unkind and crude and almost vicious to this lovely woman. But she just let love go out to the boy. He was only 14. And many times she would leave the living room or the dining room or the kitchen and go into her bedroom and cry and pull herself together and cover her hurts and go back into the living quarters of the house and assume her duties. This went on for a number of months as she continued to let love go out. Always getting hold of herself when she went into her bedroom and becoming so in tune with God that she could let love flow out when she walked back out among the children. And then one morning, the boy sat at the breakfast table, and he poured out everything that was in his heart. And he told this lovely woman what he had intended to do, and he wasn't going to let her stay. He was going to run her off, that nobody could take his mother's place. And then he put his arms on the breakfast table and laid his head on his arms and wept and wept and wept. And she came to him and she patted his shoulder, and she told him it was beautiful that he loved his mother so much. And she admired him for loving his mother that way, that she wasn't taking his mother's place. Nobody could do that. She was just taking her own place. And she had come to love them and to help them. And the hurt was healed, and there was a bond between the two. And as the years passed, this boy, when he became a man, loved this woman very deeply. And through the latter years of her life after the father had passed away, it was this boy who cared for her most tenderly, who stood beside her in every need, who looked after her every want, and who loved her and cared for her to the end of her life. The power of it. She could not have won in any other way. She could not have fought her way through this situation. And there are situations in life that we can only love our way through. And if we can love enough, we can overcome any situation. But it takes the grace of God to do this. We don't have enough grace of ourselves to love sufficiently. Many times in my life I have faced a situation and I have tried to love a person, and I have tried to love a situation, and I have been confronted by my own inability and my own weakness. And I have dropped on my knees beside my bed and lifted my face and said, "Oh, Father, this is too big for me. Please let your love flow through me to this person or to this situation. I am not big enough to love enough." And when I become an open channel and allow the love of God to flow through me, then that divine love always touches the situation and melts it and brings good out of it. That's the power of love. That's the power of love going out to reach another, to transform, to make whole. Starr Daily tells a wonderful story in his book, Love Can Open Prison Doors, and Starr gave me the privilege of using this story. I think it's one of the most wonderful stories that I know of the power of love. We know Starr as a great man of God, and he is. And Starr is an example of what the grace of God can do for a man who has been in sin. And as you know, Starr was in and out of penitentiaries many years of his life. Starr did not kill people. His specialty was opening safes. He ran away from home when he was a little boy and was taken in by a group of thugs, as you know. And because he was young and tender and had sensitive hands, he could feel, when opening a safe, he could feel the, whatever it is, the drop, when you turn the combination and so on. He could feel those weights drop into place with his fingertips, sensitive. And he grew up with that feel in his fingers, almost a sixth sense in his fingers to understand the locks on safes. And so Starr had been doing this. He'd been in and out of prison, a hardened man. And one time he heard that the Catholic Church had taken an offering. So he decided he would go into the home of the priest and he would get that money. You probably have read the story, but even if you have, I will refresh it in your memory. So Starr stole stealthily into the priest's home that night and went to the safe and was turning the knobs and listening for the proper numbers and so on when he heard a noise on the stair. And he turned and said, "Stop!" And then a voice, very kind, said, "Son, I will do you no harm." And the man kept coming. It was an elderly priest in his house robe and his slippers. And Starr looked at him again and said, "Stop, or I'll shoot you." But the priest kept on coming and said, "I will do you no harm." And he kept descending the stairs. And then Starr pointed the gun at him and said, "Stop, I tell you, or I'll shoot." But the priest kept on coming. And Starr says that his hand literally froze on that gun and he could not pull the trigger. And the priest came on down and he said, "What is it you want?" Well, he said, "I want money." So the priest opened the safe and took the money out and set it on the table, and he said, "Here it is. This offering was taken for the orphans, but if you need it more than they, here it is." He said, "What are you going to do with it?" And Starr said, "Oh, I suppose I'll eat it up and drink it up." "Well, if you need it more than the children, here it is. Sit down and we'll talk a while." And they sat. And then the priest said, "Come out in the kitchen and let's have a bite to eat." So they went in the kitchen and the priest got out milk and cheese and bread and they ate together. And then after a while, Starr got up and said, "Well, I must be going." And he started to walk out and the priest said, "Oh, you're forgetting the money." And Starr said, "I never eat a man's food and take his money." There's a sense of honor even among thieves. And always after that, when Starr would begin to open a safe, the memory of this old priest would come to him and the power of the love that emanated from this man of God. He was without fear. He was wrapped in love. He came down in love, and the love emanated from him so wonderfully that it reached out to Starr and literally froze his hand. And he was not able to pull the trigger of a gun. Love. Love going out. It's a tremendous thing, isn't it? Probably all of you know Dr. John Peters and World Neighbors. How many of you know about World Neighbors? Oh, good, good, good. I think Dr. Laubach and John Peters were here about 3 years ago, something like that, at this camp. Isn't that right? 4 years ago. 5. Well, whenever it was. Anyway, they've been here, and that's simply wonderful. Well, John and Kay Peters are personal friends of ours, and we knew them before John went into this great work of his. Kay Peters has been a friend of mine for many, many years. She's John's wonderful wife. Sometimes when I go to Oklahoma City, and if they're in Oklahoma City, I go out to see them. The last time I was there, we had the most marvelous fellowship. And as we sat together in their apartment, and by the way, Kay and John Peters have given away and disposed of all of their things, their earthly possessions, until, as Kay said, we can put everything we own into our station wagon. Now, Kay is a marvelous pianist, and she had a grand piano that was a beauty. And they had their home in Oklahoma City, and she had beautiful china and beautiful silver, and all the things that a woman loves. Kay has turned loose of all of those things. And now she goes with John part of the time. Part of the time she stays at home and prays. But she knows the power of this love going out to John while he's in his great work. The things they have given up, it just humbles me to think about it. But while I was there, they were telling me some wonderful things about their work. And they told me this wonderful story. Of course, John is president of World Neighbors, but the man who is in charge of all overseas work is Merlin Bishop. And they told me a story about Merlin Bishop, and they said I might tell it. I hope I can meet Merlin Bishop sometime and tell him what I've been doing and get his privilege of using this story. Before the last World War, when Japan and China were in some altercation over Manchuria, Merlin Bishop was there and was taking the side of the Chinese, interested in the Chinese. And while there on some kind of a mission, he was caught by the Japanese. Now, he was just a youngster, I think in his latter teens. But he knew this tremendous power of love going out, even then, and the power of loving until it overcame. So he was sentenced to be shot. And he said, "May I have one request granted?" And they said, "Oh, if it's reasonable." "Oh, it's reasonable, all right. I just want to ask that you do not blindfold me. I will not move. I will stand beside the wall, but don't cover my eyes." So they said, "All right." So a sergeant and a number of privates got out with their guns, and they stood Merlin Bishop up against the wall, and Merlin began to let love go out, to radiate it. And he just looked at that sergeant, and he just let love flow out from his heart and from his countenance. And he looked at all those privates with their guns, and he let love flow out to them, God's love, pour out to those people. And the privates threw down their guns and ran. And there was only the sergeant standing facing Merlin. And Merlin just focused his eyes upon the eyes of this sergeant and let love pour out. Love pour out, love pour out. Until finally the sergeant decided that he couldn't shoot the man, so he took his bayonet and stuck it in the end of his gun and started toward Merlin. But Merlin kept his eyes on him and just kept this love going out. And just as the sergeant got there, he closed his eyes, and then it was that Merlin dodged. And he grabbed the sergeant with one arm and the gun with the other. And he just stood there, and he looked at him, and he glowed, and he poured it on, and he glowed, and he poured it on, and he just held him, and he loved, and he loved, and he looked at him, and the man wilted. Finally, he said, "Come inside." And the two went inside, and the sergeant served him a cup of tea. And then he said, "I'm going to tell you a secret road of how to get out here, and you get out quick." So he told him a secret passage which he could follow to get out of the place, and Merlin Bishop got out. And that is the man who has charge of all overseas works of World Neighbors. Isn't it marvelous? Isn't it marvelous to have a man of that caliber, a man of that spiritual understanding at the head of World Neighbors? And then John told me something else that was so wonderful. John said, when I go around to these various settlements that we have, they make little Christian settlements, you know, wherever they go, and bring in the people, and it is a Christian unit. And he said, when I go there and the man in charge comes and talks to me, and he says, they are doing thus and thus, and they are trying to do thus and thus, and they think if they had so and so that they could do such and such. And I say in my heart, he isn't making it. He's not succeeding. But if the leader of that little community comes to me and says, we have accomplished so and so, and we feel that if we had such and such, we could make so much more advancement. And I say in my heart, that man's making it. He's not standing off like this and saying, they do so and so. He's getting down on their level and he says, we. He becomes one with them. And in this becoming one with the people, he lets love flow out. And that's the power. And that's the healing, and that's the drawing power, and that's the cement that holds things together. The great love that goes out. That's really the power of Christian missions. And if we try to carry on Christian missions in any other way, we fail. For the scripture says, except the Lord build the house, we labor in vain who build it. And when the Lord builds the house, it must be cemented together with love. And when a missionary goes on the field and can love, and can love, and can love, in spite of all difficulties, then God can speak through that individual. And that's true of a church. That's the way to succeed as a pastor of a church, to love enough. That's the way to succeed as a Sunday school teacher, to love enough. That's the way to succeed in any line of endeavor, is to love enough. And when we are failing, it would be well for us to test our love. Are there some flaws in our love? Is there resentment? What are the things that are breaking the flow of our love in our work and to the people with whom we work? For this is the power. This is the secret of success. You know the story of Dr. Frank Laubach. And I will refer to Dr. Laubach. I've worked with him so much, and I love him so dearly. I think he's one of the greatest men of this age. And in that wonderful little booklet of his, Letters of a Modern Mystic, he tells of going to the Moros in the Philippines after asking God to give him the hardest mission field in the world. And when he heard of this mission field, he said, I'll go there, because those Moros had been so mistreated by the white men, the traders, that they would not let a white man come near them. And Dr. Laubach was so confident of himself that he felt he could go and reach them, but when he got there, he found he could not get close to them. They would not listen. And he tried, but he could not get their confidence. And he tells us of how one evening he and his little dog Tip went up on Signal Hill. And there, as he looked out across the valley, he realized that he was an utter failure, and he told God, I am a failure. I'll have to quit. I'll have to go home. And he said he just put his head in his hands and cried like a child. And when he was all broken himself, then it was that God spoke to him, and he heard the voice say, Frank, and he listened. And then the voice continued, you don't love these people. And he said it smote him, because as he examined himself, he realized he didn't love them. He had come to be a missionary. He was going to minister to them. He was going to give them something from his exalted position and hand them something down, but to love them with a heartfelt tenderness and compassion and a oneness of spirit, he knew he didn't. And so he said, no, Lord, I really don't. And he prayed the Lord to give him a baptism of love. And he said there on Signal Hill, God gave him a baptism of love and smote him colorblind. It's a great combination. And Dr. Laubach said from that hour he could go into any place in the world and meet the most unbeautiful kind of people, and put his arm around a big black man and pat his shoulder and tell him, you're a wonderful fellow, and actually feel love going out to that man. And that's the secret of Dr. Laubach's great success. For he's gone around the world no telling how many times, and he has put the languages of so many different tribes into writing and taught the people to read. And his little primer of the story of Jesus is the most interesting thing. Have you ever heard Brother Frank read his primer on the story of Jesus? Something to look forward to. I hope you can hear it sometime, of how he writes the story of Jesus in simple words. But the power that enabled Dr. Laubach to be the great missionary he has been is the power of love. The love of God going out. And dear people, that's the solution to all of our problems in this world of chaos, is to love. To love with compassion and understanding, to love as God loves. And to let that love of God flow out from our hearts unto other people's. And that dissolves all bitterness and all difficulties and allows God to take over. What is God? What is God? Why, that question has been considered throughout all the ages. Job cried, "Oh, if I could only know him." If I could know him. What is God? A creator? Oh, yes. He has created all of the universe. God is a creator. A lawgiver? Yes, God is a lawgiver. And there have to be laws. And God has made laws and given mankind laws. But God is more than a creator. God is more than a lawgiver. And when Jesus came, he gave us the most understandable picture of God when he said, when you pray, say, "Our Father." That's what God is, our Father. And that was the finest conception that man could have of God. But with this conception of God as a Father, there is something else that is even higher. For James tells us that God is love. And when we consider God as love, pure love, it embraces all of these other attributes, and it is the highest that the human mind can conceive of. For God is love. And what is prayer? When we can love another with all the love we have and allow the love of God to come into us and empower the love which we have and let the love of God flow out to another, that is the highest type of prayer. Love going out. The love of God flowing through us to another. That is prayer in its highest, its finest, and its most powerful. And this is the way Jesus loved. Study his life, read his words, get a new glimpse of his love as it poured out to the people, to the children, to the weak, to the helpless, and see the great love that flowed out. Now, Jesus was no weakling. Jesus was intelligent. And I have noticed this, that Jesus always tempered his words to the thickness of the skin of the persons to whom he spoke. When speaking to little children and to mothers and to sick people, he was as gentle as the most tender mother. But when the scribes and the Pharisees came trying to trap him and put him to death, he said, "You generation of vipers, who's warned you to flee from the wrath to come?" He knew their attitude. He knew what was in their hearts. And he spoke to them according to their own attitude. But underneath it all, there was the demonstration of the supreme love. The love of the Father, which unlocks all difficulties. The love which is the great solution for every problem of life. As we go forward in this camp, let's let love flow among ourselves. Let's let love flow out in our prayers. Let's let love take over from this day on in this camp, and it'll be one of the greatest camps we ever have had. I assure you of that.